Hello and welcome to Quackalope. Thank you for being here. Today we're talking about IPs. Books, movies, TV shows, but more particularly video games.
Right.
And how we take a video game, the story, the heart, the soul, the mechanics, and bring them into a tabletop setting. I'm here with the creative director, the lead product officer, one of the founders of Steamforged Games.
Yep.
You want to introduce yourself, let them know what you do and why you're equipped to talk about this idea. Hint, hint, tell them about the IPs that you have.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm Matt Hart. I'm one of the founders at Steamforged Games, and I've been lucky enough to work with a team to bring to life things like Dark Souls, Resident Evil, Monster Hunter, amongst others.
Elden Ring, of
course.
There's a few IPs under your belt.
We get to work with a lot of awesome companies and a lot of awesome IPs.
So one of the things I can say about Steamforged Games is that out of the companies that I know of that are taking and utilizing IPs in products, the whole foundation for the conversation that I wanted to have with you is based off the fact we just got done with playing through a whole series of Monster Hunter scenarios, and I think there are other companies that do it very well, but you're one of, if not, I mean, you're certainly one of the best companies at taking an IP and bringing that into a tabletop setting where I feel very confident that I can have a person who knows the IP play the game and very comfortably transition into a board game hobby space, which is one of the biggest puzzles that I think is presented.
Well, that's very nice to hear.
In the board game IP world. We all are very aware of IP projects kind of being terrible. You take a video game, you make it into a movie, and the movie is awful, right? I mean, you could look at the Assassin's Creed crossovers for that mark. You take a book and you turn it into a video game, or a book into a board game, and it can be very hard to take what people fell in love with in that product, in the original medium that it was presented, and bring it into another medium, another full system, and have that flavor still be there. In fact, one of my favorite IPs, I really haven't liked the games created from it. I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to set that out there. But I'll tell you afterwards.
Okay, fine. I'm curious.
But one of the IPs that I like desperately love, I've purchased, played, and just couldn't bring myself to fully cover them on the channel because they didn't sing to me in the way that the medium that I fell in love with did. And that's not true here with the games that you've presented. Monster Hunter, for instance, the game we have sitting in front of us, is one of these games where you go off on these kind of one-shot missions, right? You take down this giant creature, and you've brought this flavor of movement, of consistent repositioning, of big threatening battles that let you still feel like you're being incredibly powerful and incredibly dynamic.
Yeah.
You've introduced the mechanic of sharpening, the idea that your weapons don't always stay perfect in the midst of a battle that has you have to rethink about the way that you want to strategize, and has you re-engage with the creature instead of just having this one-off smash each other till you die. And that's all stuff that the video game did very well, that was unique to the video game, that works here in the board game setting. The same with Resident Evil, right? The idea of peeking around rooms and knowing the layout of the map, but not being sure what's going to be in there and suffering the consequences of discovering something that you didn't or weren't ready to deal with.
Yep.
It's all about this slow exploration, this tactical planning, the maneuvering and positioning, and having the limited weapons and the limited ammo that you have, having it and using it where it really matters, and when it doesn't really matter, shutting some doors behind you and ignoring the other things happening on the board. So, I've talked a lot, but that's the foundation for why I wanted to film this video. And I asked you to write down some notes, how you as a company approach bringing IPs over. I don't know what these are, but I would love to hear.
Okay.
What are the core concepts, the tenets that you all as a company look at when deciding to take on an IP?
Yep.
And then when asking the question, how are we going to bring this IP into a board game setting in a way that is palatable not only to gamers, but also people that know and love the product you're working with already?
Yeah. So I think I'm going to love talking about this, so I'm going to really struggle to kind of keep this to anything less than quite a long conversation.
Okay,
but
great.
I'll do my very best for
Us both, then.
Yeah.
Enjoy the show.
So I think one of the things that I feel lucky with Steamforged is I worked in video game development for quite some time, nearly 2 decades working in video game development before moving into the tabletop space.
So you know the video game marketplace,
and I think that really helps.
Did you step into what was the ground zero for Steamforged? What was your initial IP?
So the initial IP was Guild Ball, which is an original IP, and that was something that Rich and I worked on in our spare time. We put together a Kickstarter. Kickstarter was really starting to kind of emerge at that time, and we kind of got excited about the idea of, well, maybe we could do a game. We had this cool idea for this amazing world, started working on the game, and then that started to kind of really sort of like gather pace. And then about 2 or 3 months after Guild Ball had launched, I bumped into one of my old colleagues, and they sort of said to me, "Oh, what are you doing now?" And I kind of said, "Hey, Guild Ball, and this is, this is what we're working on." He said, I'm in charge of the Dark Souls franchise at the moment. Do you think that would make a good board game?" To which the answer was yes, of course. And he said, "Well, can you make one?" I was like, "Absolutely, we can."
So you didn't initially intend to do video game, board game crossovers, but your experience and relationships in that industry
really
set a foundation for where we're going. Okay, sorry for interrupting.
So I think there's 2 aspects to that. So knowing the right people just helps you get the right conversations. Understanding how video games are put together and the core components of a video game that triggers the response that the players have really helps you understand why the players feel the way they do and how can we recreate a similar kind of feeling in the game. And that is one of the most important points. And I've often talked about this, which is, and this is probably sort of like point number 1, is understand what the emotional response of the video game is. So if you know how the players feel, how the game is designed to make the players feel, it gives you a massive head start to making sure that if your board game can recreate similar feelings, the players will then map that onto the original IP.
So you might play through something like Resident Evil and write down words like claustrophobic.
Absolutely.
Or like
tension.
Pressured for time, tension, or something like Monster Hunter, and you just write down the word powerful.
Yep.
And that means design doesn't have to be the same A and B mechanics, but I should feel like I'm squeezed. Or I should feel like I'm vicious. And it doesn't mean the other thing I'm fighting is vicious, but in Monster Hunter, I don't feel vulnerable unless I'm fighting something that is bigger than me by tenfold. And then I know I'm in the wrong area at the wrong time. Yep. Instead, I feel strong and they feel stronger. And that's a different type of approach.
So that emotional response in Monster Hunter is the feeling that you're all powerful, the discovery that you're not, and then that sensation of moving along that journey and realizing actually now I'm powerful enough to do it.
Interesting.
So that's a real emotional journey that you go on, and it's quite, it cuts to the core of our human DNA, which is, why do we like telling the same stories every time? It's that kind of up against an insurmountable challenge, journey along, overcoming the challenge, feeling like you progress, discovering the new challenge, and that's a really.
So point number 1 is identify the emotional response of the player
and look to how can we recreate that in plastic and paper and cardboard.
Yeah, and it's not about mechanics at all.
It's
about the experience of play, because if the experience of play matches 1-to-1, if it gives you the same feeling, then you're already in the right direction.
Yep.
Okay.
So point number 2 is almost as important. It's what is the reason that players are going to play this and not the video game?
Sure.
So how can you create a unique proposition to the players to say, we know that you love Monster Hunter, this is why you should play the board game as well as the main video game.
It has to do something different and not try to replace.
Yes.
You're not trying to say, hey, you love the video game, let me give you the video game on the table. The exact same thing, A to B, because you love video games, so why wouldn't you play it more? Well, the answer then is, I'll play the video game more. Right. You're right, I love the video game.
Yeah,
so
exactly right.
What have been some of those puzzles, like think about Monster Hunter, what was the answer here?
So the big thing that I think Monster Hunter captures is that collaboration around the tabletop. Now, you're playing on your Xbox, on your PlayStation, and you got voice comms, you're chatting with people, you don't necessarily know them all the time.
Sure.
You're not necessarily able to have kind of in-depth conversations. For me, one of the magics of tabletop gaming experience is getting together with friends or people I don't know and making new friends and having a collaborative experience. And for me, that's one of the things that Monster Hunter World, the board game, does better.
Because when you jumped into a party in Monster Hunter World, which had the premise of doing this collaborative thing,
right,
you were smashing a big creature, and you needed the help to win,
yep,
but you didn't necessarily know or relate to the people that you were playing with unless you had a
correct,
core gaming group.
Yep.
Whereas here, when we're sitting down, we are that gaming group.
We are the
and
core
so the
gaming
strategy,
group.
the conversation...
Yeah, so the very best experience you'll have when you're playing Monster Hunter World is if you go on with buddies who are your regular gaming buddies.
Sure.
Right? Because you have the relationships, you have the in-jokes, you have the memories when, you miss a...
and so you're actually taking a part of the video game and you're saying, that's amazing, but board game does this better than the video game franchise.
In my opinion,
right
yeah, it does it better because we're around the table, we're in person, and we're interacting in a much more controllable kind of time frame as well. So, in a video game, it's real time, decisions need to be made quickly, whereas at a tabletop, you're able to play at the pace at which your group is comfortable. Now, some groups will really enjoy agonizing over everything and getting the exact perfect kind of response. Some groups will love that. I'm never going to try and make a game that stops you from doing that.
Sure.
It's not my jam.
Sure.
But for me, playing loosey-goosey, loose and fast, kind of just going in there and doing some stuff and seeing what kind of cool things happen, that's more my style. Having a game that can cater to both kinds of groups and all of the spectrum in between, well, that's our challenge.
So identify the emotional framework of the game
Yep.
and what you need to bring over into the IP.
Yep.
Then identify how the board game itself or whatever other IP you're doing can translate some part of that story, some part of that mechanic system in a better way than the other thing. Make a different experience.
Yep.
Have it be unique in some form. It's similar to content creation in some ways. Like,
absolutely.
How do you do it? How do you copy? How do you do it better?
Right.
How do you make it watchable? Interesting.
Yep.
Okay. Number 3.
So this is really important, and it's a mantra that we remind ourselves of constantly. Is the board game that we're making is not a simulation of the video game.
Yeah, it's not a 1-to-1.
It's not a 1-to-1, and it's such a delicious trap to fall into, where you kind of go, oh, but the video game does this, this, and this, and it's like you have to remember this is a board game first and foremost. So good mechanics, good board game mechanics, are way more important than a simulation of a 1-for-1 ratio.
So that's so hard to do, though, and I would love to hand you some IPs where the games themselves, again, I won't name names,
right,
but the games have been very true recreations of the video game on the table. Down to the point where there's an AI system running behind the scenes that the computer does for me, and now I have to do for myself on the table.
Right.
And it makes for a bad mechanic experience, but a really interesting play experience. But I would rather play the video game.
Well, exactly.
Than
it's
deal
at that point
with the board game.
Yeah, you're straying back into that territory of, well, why don't I just let my PlayStation handle all this for me? Why am I doing it?
Why am I running the math?
Yeah.
Why am I drawing the cards? Why am I randomizing all this?
Yeah. So we don't have multiple processors, working all the time. We have, a fairly simple AI. Our capability for AI on a board game is far less sophisticated than the AI that's available on a video game.
But some people still try. So it's not.
Well, no, but like I say, I don't know if they try because academically they want to achieve that challenge. I just think it's a delicious trap to fall into.
There's a desire to. So how do you avoid that trap? How, when identifying a mechanic that's really cool in a video game that doesn't necessarily need to be in the board game, how do you decide that it doesn't need to be included, or that it needs to be changed in a way that feels similar but isn't exactly A to A?
So. That's the next point, and I think this is true for every game design, not just for video game design, but because it protects you against that trap, decisions in games must have consequences. So you can't just do something for the sake of doing it, right? You can't have a mechanic that, it's what it does in a video game, therefore we need to have it, right? Or I think this is just a cool idea, and therefore we need to have it. It needs to have and hold its own place in the game engine. So when you look at the game engine and you see how the flow of the different the different currencies that move through the game and the different game states as they move around, every single component.
Currency being things like health and damage and stats and stuff like that as well.
Yeah, and ball position and everything like that. Every single component part needs to contribute in a way that you're happy with. And so as long as you kind of hold that mantra, it is much harder for you to kind of go, oh, well, the video game does X, therefore we should always have that in.
So you have to ask the question, is this tied in? Does this have a consequence to the game we're playing? or is it just a thing that exists because the video game did it first?
And generally, the video game does X is usually a conversation start where we say, okay, well, one, do we want to recreate that one for one? Right? Generally, the answer to that is no. But the immediate follow-up question refers back to what we were saying before, which is, well, what does that do in the video game? Not what does it specifically do, but what does it do? What does it mean? How does it fit into the video game? What is the emotional response?
Because if the video game designers were doing this as well, in a way, having consequences for the things they tied in, then you as a designer for a board game have to identify the emotional or mechanical consequence of what they put into the video game and ask for this new product that you're creating that has to be unique. How does that emotional, mechanical, physical consequence tie back into our product?
Right.
It reflects it, but it's not the same thing.
Correct.
Because the game you're making is not the same thing.
And I think it neatly leads on to one of the key tricks that we have is if we can create an emotional response and situations that feel familiar to you as a fan of a video game, what we're actually doing is so as human beings, we don't actually have memories. Our brain recreates memories from external stimuli. So we will talk about, I don't know, where you went on vacation last year. You don't have a special part of your brain that's locked away with, all the cool holiday pics you took in your brain and all the cool drinks you had and all that. But what you have is the ability to recreate those memories. When I say, well, where did you go? What was the weather like? And you're rebuilding those memories live. That's literally how the human brain works.
Interesting.
So
it's a weird application for me, too, because I'm highly visually driven.
Right.
When I fall in love with a book, and I know I love a book, it's when I stop knowing that I'm reading text, and I start just seeing
the
images.
world. Yeah.
And so, like, a memory for me, I feel like I have a place in my brain that remembers that memory.
Right.
But what you're saying is that I'm creating a visual recreation of what I think was there, and then relating that to you verbally.
Well, and you're overlaying it onto what's caused that stimulation. So take, Resident Evil, for example. Hopefully one of the things that all of us will remember is that first time you walk down the corridor and the zombie dog smashed through the glass. None of us will ever forget that. It was one of those moments that just slams into your brain as this happened to you, and you will always be able to recreate that memory. And you remember the shock, you remember the lurch, the squirt of adrenaline, like the kind of panic. What do I do now? This is the first time you've met the zombie dogs, right? What do I do now?
100%.
And then all of those things kind of happen. Well, how does a board game recreate that sensation? It doesn't. What it does is it creates the event where the zombie dog smashed through the glass, and then you remember that. You remember how you felt at that time, but because it was now caused by what's happening at the tabletop, you're mapping those feelings, those memories, those visuals onto what's happening on the tabletop.
So what is this point? Distill this point down to
so this is, we look to recreate memories from the video game.
Recreate memories from the video. So you're working with an IP, and you identify moments that people will have stimuli for.
Yep.
And then you're tapping into that emotional response they have in the game.
What can we do to make you remember that?
So you're not
game?
just playing with a brand new IP that's reintroducing these experiences. You're saying, hey, our players likely have this experience that we share.
Yeah.
How can we then tap into and in a way manipulate their memory and their fondness for this in a way that'll be very satisfying?
So there's a sort of similar, but by way of analogy, I saw a really interesting talk at GDC, which is Game Developers Conference in San Francisco for video game development. And it was one of the I think it was the lead art director for Dead Space. And what they talked about was during the opening sequence, one of the hardest things to do, because it's super expensive, is a perfectly circular object, because obviously video games use polygons, so everything is always straight edge. So in order to create the illusion of a perfect circle, you need a bucket load of polygons to do that. That's hideously expensive to actually run in real time. And so what they looked to do was have a number of lingering shots on super high res, perfectly circular coffee cups and a globe and this, that and the other in the very first kind of like couple of minutes of CG that happened in the video game. And what they were doing is deliberately programming into your head.
That's a circle.
And you're like, but you see the coffee cup, you go, oh my God, that's the most circular coffee cup I've seen in my life. And you won't consciously say that, but because as gamers and consumers of this, you instinctively know that is exceptional. Then what happens is, as you're playing the game and you're in real time, and obviously the poly count has dropped right down, you look at the coffee cup that's in the game.
It's not that.
It's not that. It's maybe it's an octagonal kind of object.
But you remember how circular it should be.
Exactly. And then you're kind of going, oh man, this game's amazing.
And so in a board game where you can't have this animated smashing through the glass scene, you're saying, hey, most of our players had this moment. We're walking on the hallway. We're going to have dogs either do the exact same thing, or we're going to have them do something similar but different enough that it's unique for our game experience, but our players are going to go, oh my gosh! Like, instead of like running down the hallway towards you, maybe you're like out in a field and they're jumping at, like, but still there's that moment where you suddenly realize that correlates to this, and my brain just loves that association.
And you're then mapping that high detail that comes from the video game onto the components that we have.
Wes was talking about, his verdict on Monster Hunter World came down to playing against this little Kukululu.
Easy for you to say.
This little dodo style creature, because he was like, I remember specifically these little bird brains running around stealing eggs, and you don't have to deal with them until you do. And if you attack them, they start lobbing stones at you and grenades that'll blow up, and they hop around. They're very annoying. And we decided to fight it. And Wes was like, this felt right. I felt like I was annoying this little pesky creature with human-like appendages that was just lobbing stuff in my direction, and I never should have messed with him in the first place. And so you were able to effectively tap into
here's the thing,
that
and
experience.
This is a real kind of peek behind the curtain. If you took those abilities and that miniature and you transposed them with a miniature that looked differently, but the exact same abilities, but they just had different names, that would not been as powerful an experience for Wes.
100%.
Right?
100%.
And so that's the magic.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's kind of key.
So pull memories and utilize memories in part of the game design concept or philosophy.
And that really comes from, so one of the things that is a prerequisite for us at Steamforge. So you asked me right at the beginning, what do I look at when I'm out talking to publishers and IP holders? One of the things that we absolutely have to have is a resident superfan within the SFG team for an IP that we're working on.
And you do, and I will argue you do not pay them enough. The thousands of hours that go into video game research.
I mean, I would tend to agree.
I don't even know what they're paid or who they are, but I know for a fact they've spent more time in these worlds
they have indeed.
than they probably should have.
Yeah, they have indeed. But what it does is it creates a really authentic voice. It shortcuts a huge amount of research, which is what I think you're alluding to.
I think a lot of people grab an IP and they don't maybe have the experience or do the due diligence, and I would almost argue that doing the due diligence will never be the same as having the experience. Because if I'm playing a video game new from the perspective of a reviewer, a content creator, or someone who needs to make a board game from this video game, I am only going to observe it through the lens of that. The same with someone who grabs a IP for a TV show or a movie. Suddenly you have this perspective that's skewed because you're creating content, as opposed to a perspective that comes from the place of, hey, I'm a fan. And I suddenly want to design in a world where I am part of this. The experiences I want for the other people that are playing.
And it's one of those that once the genie's out of the box, you can't put it back in. So I couldn't say to someone, play this game as a new player, but by the way, we're going to make this as a board game.
You can't.
Right?
You couldn't.
You just couldn't, because it just changes the
perspective.
perspective.
So you're listening to your team and your staff and the infrastructure you've built, and hearing where the love is, and then saying, great, can I pursue that? Do I have those networks, those relationships? It's really cool.
And you know, and so part of my job as you know, as growing and leading the development team is seeding out or getting a sensation of what people are playing. I know what the guys and girls in the team like playing. So that gives me a kind of head start, seeding out, hey, have you seen this game? Does this look interesting to you? Seeing if anyone latches onto it. That starts becoming, I find out that Sherwin's like playing the heck out of Battle Brothers at the moment. Oh, well, that's very interesting. I might kind of reach out and have a chat with the guys over there, So I think for me, I would go with some degree of trepidation if we went into a game that we didn't have someone who had at least played it through completely.
I love that.
Before we started kind of developing it, because I think it's too easy then to have an is it inauthentic or unauthentic voice? Unauthentic voice when you're making the game. So the authentic voice comes from someone who consumed the media as a fan first. Then they can go back and play the heck out of it and disassemble it and exactly
stuff like that. Yeah.
So I think that's like a really kind of interesting and it's an essential part that's hard to do. So the other part, so another thing is it's absolutely critical to have real attention to detail because fans of an IP consume that IP.
They know it.
They know it. So we have to know it, and we have to make sure that our game knows it.
So this is where the dissecting comes from. You've already had a fan.
Yeah.
Now they need to become the foremost expert on not only the game itself, but also the fan community.
Yep.
Okay.
And then the challenge is then elevated when our version of the game is different from the version that they've interpreted. So they need to interpolate that experience into the game engine that we're looking to build to make sure that the details we're putting into the game engine cross-reference back to the core video game experience and they don't feel like we're doing something silly.
Now, a side tangent on here, though. When working with an IP, there's more people in the room than just you all as designers and developers. And so when you have something like a fan response to a game, that is not always what the original IP holder's impression of the game is.
Yep.
How do you navigate what you want to include versus what the IP holder is willing to let you include? Like, because you have to navigate this weird world of, can we make our own unique art assets, or do they have a stranglehold on that? Can we introduce our own storylines, or do we have to follow the script they've given us? So you have to walk this middle line. I know it's unique for each publisher.
It is,
so I don't want to talk about specifics.
But the challenges that you overcome are similar each time, but the outcome of it is unique. So the very best games we make are the games where we're able to discuss up front and the IP holder is able to kind of give us clear boundaries to within which we can work. So it's much easier for us to know what is sacrosanct, what we have flex on. So simple things like like working with From Software for Elden Ring, knowing that we can use the in-game textures for the battle mats. Well, suddenly that opens the door to us having, a 50, 60 page battle map book.
Sure.
I can now work with a team to create unique battle experiences because we know that the asset creation is an authentic asset because it comes from in-game. We know that From Software are going to be happy with that treatment of it, and it gives us a huge amount of kind of headroom.
Whereas having to create graphic design or artwork for a single battle map, I know for an indie publisher that I've talked about, you're talking 1,500 at a minimum per single piece.
We could never do a 50-page book if we were paying $1,500, $2,000 for every page. Not the least of which is each one of those will take 1 to 2 weeks of effort. So you've either got to have multiple map makers or your maps are going to take you over a year to make. So it's a lot of conversations you need to have. And this is one of the things where we work incredibly hard with our IP partners and build a huge amount of trust. So working with Capcom on Resident Evil, on Monster Hunter, and having done so consistently and faithfully and respectfully with the IP gives us a huge amount of trust from them in what we do. It
opens the door to, I could see a world, 5-10 years down the road where the Resident Evil franchise has a standalone product that is built by the Steamforged game.
I do not think that is impossible.
But right now you work within the IP.
5 years ago, that would have felt impossible.
Of course. Yeah. And I'm not saying it's Resident Evil necessarily. Maybe it's Monster Hunter, maybe it's other IPs. But building that trust and working within the framework and the guidelines they give you initially helps stretch those conversations to a point where, so when you have people screaming in the comments, they're like, oh, we want this, or why didn't you do that, or the Reddit community did this homebrew type thing, and you're like, I love what you're saying. Trust me, as a publisher, we want to support the fan community, right? But that might be a conversation 5 years down the road when that trust has been developed, as opposed to something immediately right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So listen to the community and do your best to respond to them within the context of and understand what they experienced during the game.
I think so. Riffing off of that, paying homage to the super fans, and I think the way I'd encapsulate this is saying Easter eggs are cool, right? So I always tell this story, and I love telling it. So in Resident Evil, there is a specific desk that you can go to. You can open the drawer and you can search the desk.
Yeah.
Now, there's for some reason or another, they put in an object in that desk that if you search that desk 51 times, the 52nd time that you open that drawer and search it, you get this specific item. So when we created the item deck that was absolutely specifically stacked and ordered, the 52nd item in that deck was that item.
So cool.
It means nothing to people for whom that means nothing.
But for the people who it means something to,
it means everything.
It's the world, yeah.
Yeah. So look for opportunities to put Easter eggs
for me as
in.
a player, when I see that reflected, I immediately know, without any other suppositions, I know that whoever put that in
knew what they
meant for me to find it, and they were a fan of the thing I was already a fan of.
Correct.
Like, it's just that little, like, I love you signature at the end of a project.
Exactly. It's judge us by what we do, not what we say. Because it's very easy for me or Sherwin or Jamie or whoever to kind of appear on camera and go, oh, yeah, I love it. Oh, I love Resident Evil. Oh, yeah, I couldn't play enough of it. But nothing says more how much we know about the IP or how much Sherwin knows about the IP in that specific instance than these Easter eggs that are kind of littered through the game. So Easter eggs are cool. The more obscure they are, the better they are, the more authentic your voice is. And that feeds off of having a resident superfan who understands what Easter eggs are important, what memes are important, what part of the game experience is important, and make sure that we capture elements of that in the board game as well.
And so, on the back of a vacuum seemingly starting downstairs, any more major points that you wanted to point out?
I think the bonus item is, all of that sounds great. We cannot forget that not every player of our board game is going to know the original IP. So the game must be a game for people who don't know the IP. The IP
were running
cannot
a gameplay
carry
of Monster Hunter with 3 different types of players.
Yeah.
West, who knew it intrinsically,
right,
like inside out, or was able to pull those Easter eggs and know them.
Yeah.
We had me, who I love the Monster Hunter world, but I've never been able to spend time in it the way that you really need to be part of the community.
Yeah.
And we had, Chris.
I don't think he'd even played it, has he?
He never played the video game before at all.
Yeah.
So those 3 people were able to approach this, and all of us were able to give our judgment and our verdict on it.
Right. And that's key. So making sure that an IP is not going to carry a bad board game, right? A bad board game will ruin an IP. So it goes back to what I was saying before. It has to be a good game. It has to have good mechanics.
It feels like you're building on specific experiential things when it comes to the IP love.
Yeah.
But that's not the foundation or the core of your game. Your game is a board game first, and then beyond that is the love letter that you're writing to the people who know the game. It's the memories and the visage and the little cards that are hidden in the deck.
Yeah.
But at the foundation, it comes back to like the mechanics and the system and the experience you're trying to display, and that can be separated from the IP, or it can be in combination with the IP and be stronger because of it.
The combination is what we're aiming for. Yeah. So that's kind of, I don't know, how many is that, 9, 10?
Some number.
Maybe.
Some number.
But
all I know is I love the conversation.
I mean, I love talking about it. I do feel lucky that we have, a unique kind of blend of my experience of video development, the super fans that we have in in our creative team, being able to pull it all together. We do pretty rigorously follow this this is our creative process for licensed IP. Awesome. And what's exciting for me is seeing how that bleeds out into our original IP as well. So there are key elements of what we put into our original IP that really riffs off of the same kind of sentiments. We're trying to create those kind of experiences as well in the games that we make from scratch.
Cool. Thanks for watching. At the end of the day, this is just a conversation that I ended up enjoying enough. I would have had it late at night over a glass of bourbon without anyone watching.
Oh,
right?
Fair enough. I don't mind sharing.
No, I don't either. Yeah. But about 5 minutes into this video, I was like, oh, I'm just interested.
This is not going to be a 10-minute video.
This is not about them. This is now about me curious about how this process works.
Yeah.
Hopefully you've enjoyed this. Whatever the case, though, whatever you do, remember to do the important thing, which I think is back Iceborne. Is that the idea?
Well, I mean, that's a good start.
Okay.
I think I would like to get SFG, like the Steamforged Discord server. We hang out on there, so all of the developers are on there chatting about games with people who love them. So if this kind of thing resonates for you, come and hang out with us on Discord. That'd be a cool thing.
And lend your voice to the creation of some cool products.
Yeah.
We'll see you next time.